As this real-world asset landscape is evolving, the demand for more niche, innovative type of assets to be brought on chain is also expanding. We're having conversations with teams that are looking to bring like luxury goods like watches, right? Or like cars, like one-off tokenized assets on chain. Or unique financial metrics like bond ratings, like very niche one-off opportunities.
Here we are with Dylan Hansen, Business Development at DIA. Dylan, welcome to Defiant. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So, Dylan, let's just start with the very basics of what DIA is and does.
Yeah, so very simply, DIA is a cross-chain Oracle provider. We were founded in 2018. The product's been live since 2020. And we are currently live on 56 different chains, L1s and L2s. So super high level, what DIA does is provide on-chain data feeds for token assets, real-world assets, and other types of data that decentralized applications, dApps, need to function. So whether it's DeFi, stable coins, perpetual DEXs, DIA's data that we serve is really integral to the functioning of these different types of applications.
Can you dive a bit deeper into how DIA works?
Yeah, so really, to take a step back, the DIA architecture is what distinguishes the product. So, and specifically the way that DIA sources its data is different from other oracles. If you take a very high level perspective at the traditional Oracle architecture, so the way that other oracles source their data, they rely and primarily leverage off-chain third-party data providers. So these are basically centralized entities that exist off-chain that provide data to the nodes of a given oracle. The nodes reach consensus and push the information on-chain. So a very high-level look at this traditional architecture. And it's been proven that this architecture can be robust and decentralized and effective. But the particular caveat within that architecture that DIA was founded out of a solution towards is the fact that by the time that data is delivered on-chain, there's no transparency regarding where data is originating on the source level. So you don't know that data is coming from, let's say, Binance, Kraken, Uniswap, SushiSwap, Camelot, Curve. There's really this black box of data provenance or transparency. And so the way that DIA kind of tackles this, what was once an obstacle and as we see an opportunity, is by sourcing data directly from these first-party sources themselves. So instead of relying on third-party data providers, DIA goes directly to the first-party exchanges, the DEXs, the decentralized exchanges, and the centralized exchanges on the primary first-party data source level and deploys scrapers, which are basically contracts that take in every single tick or every trade for theoretically every single asset that's trading across these exchanges. And so on the product side, just to kind of summarize, this enables a superior level of transparency. Also, the data that we're taking in is very granular trade data, so it allows a high level of customization. And then the last thing that we really strive to differentiate ourselves with is having a super broad asset coverage. So the fact that we're taking data directly from DEXs, of course centralized exchanges, but DEXs are really this exciting place where all of these innovative assets are traded, whether it's stable coins, memes, whether it's liquid staked LSTs, LRTs, ecosystem native assets. The fact that we scrape data from DEXs directly gives us the opportunity to have a very broad coverage of these assets. And so really we strive to provide the largest asset library of any oracle.
Interesting. And so is DIA itself a blockchain?
So historically, no. DIA was launched as sort of the way that we would integrate and deploy onto various blockchains was via smart contracts. So we would deploy directly smart contracts onto each chain that we would integrate with. And looking forward, now that's a pretty relevant question because we've been for over 2 years now kind of ideating and researching and conceptualizing the next generation of the DIA architecture. So how can we basically adapt to the always changing needs of oracles across the blockchain landscape, right? Like blockchain changes day over day, week over week. And so the use cases for oracles that we saw back during the product launch in 2020 have evolved to where we are now in 2025. And so looking forward, we actually are launching a roll-up based Oracle architecture called Lumina that's been on testnet now for a couple months and shooting to go live within the next couple weeks/months, right? Not to, I guess, go too specific on target dates there, but yeah, so DIA will be, ultimately, the architecture will be roll-up based and essentially have its own chain.
That's really exciting. So will it be an Ethereum layer 2, like Ethereum rollup?
Exactly, yes. So it'll be an Ethereum layer 2 based roll-up architecture.
Is it like an optimistic based rollup, or?
So we explored multiple different stacks, and the direction that we've decided to go with the stack is based on the Arbitrum Orbit stack. So it's going to be an Orbit L2.
Interesting. Okay, so what will this new architecture enable?
Yeah. So the reason that there's kind of a lot of different reasons that we decided to launch Lumina the way that it's being developed. But a very high level look at the reasoning is because with the roll-up based architecture, what we can do is really further this vision that DIA was built with to implement the most transparent open source Oracle, right? And so with the roll-up based architecture, all of the flow of data from sourcing to validation of data feeds to the distribution of them can be done on-chain, on the roll-up with open source transparent methodologies. And so super high level, this is really DIA's kind of final stage in its phased approach towards being the fully on-chain, trustless Oracle architecture, where there's no black box of data provenance or where data is coming from or how it's being aggregated, right? It's really this open source, permissionless architecture where there's no trust assumptions. We've implemented crypto economic security through nodes and a decentralized set of node operators, but we're also implementing ZK proofs to have cryptographic security, right? So you can trace the origin of data and provide on-chain attestation regarding the source of data and how it's basically being processed throughout the Lumina architecture. So yeah, at a high level, it's our final stage in our phased approach towards full on-chain transparency and trustlessness.
So for dApps, protocols users who want to use the DIA Oracle, how do they integrate with this layer 2? Like how, yeah.
So the layer 2 is very application specific for just the flow of data, right? The sourcing, the validation, and the distribution. But dApp developers and builders will still access the data feeds on the destination chain. So whether it's Arbitrum, Optimism, Base, Polygon, any chain. Currently we're supporting 56, but we are really actively always looking to expand, the amount of chains that we're supporting. And so developers can access these Oracle data feeds on the destination chain, which they prefer. And we have different interfaces as well. We have the DIA interface where it's a pretty straightforward smart contract where you can query for multiple different asset values within one given interface. And we support the aggregator v3 interface, which is kind of oftentimes maybe more of a standard throughout the industry. So we really strive to be as accessible and easily integratable as possible.
Got it. Is there a type of data that you're optimizing for? For example, I don't know, some data providers will want to optimize for historic data, others will want to optimize for compute, so right. Modifying data. Where's kind of your niche?
Yeah, our niche has really always been the ecosystem native assets, right? These long tail and niche, innovative, exotic assets that really other Oracle providers don't tackle. Again, this relates back to the fact that we are sourcing data directly from over 56 DEXs across all of these chains. So when you're looking for an asset that's, say, natively launched on Arbitrum, and Arbitrum is a great example because a lot of those native assets have such deep liquidity that we can really spin up and provide robust price feeds for those. But we're really tackling these assets that other oracles necessarily are not necessarily covering. When a team goes and launches a protocol on Arbitrum and they launch a token for that, where are they going to seed liquidity? They're going to likely provide liquidity on the DEX. And so what we do is we come into these ecosystems and integrate those DEXs as primary data sources. And we can provide price feeds for assets that are native to that ecosystem, as opposed to just providing the blue chip common assets that are present across all ecosystems. So this is really our bread and butter, coming in and building out the DeFi ecosystem that's native to a chain. Of course, we tackle all of the blue chips, but I think this is where our product really is distinguished, and we have like a bit of a unique selling point there. And that's historically. But as we look forward, the huge opportunity that we're really positioning the new Lumina architecture to tackle is real-world assets. So super excited about the opportunity that real-world assets presents to bring tons of new users, new liquidity, new assets on chain, and to unlock this, forever distant ecosystem between like our Web3 lives and our Web2 lives. I think that we believe that real-world assets is going to be here to stay for the long term. And so as we look forward, that's really where we're also looking to position ourselves.
So how does integrating price feeds for real-world assets differentiate from what you're already doing?
Right. So as I mentioned, historically, we are really focused on this on-chain sourcing approach, getting this DEX data and also corresponding centralized exchange data, which has off-chain order books, but still primarily like crypto token price feed based. As we look towards real-world assets, we had to expand the scope of the architecture, and this really relates to Lumina as well because we've really built Lumina to be positioned to now also support robust data from off-chain third-party providers, right? Because this data, the real-world asset data, at least initially, is going to be provided by off-chain providers. It might not only be third-party, it will always be third-party data providers, but it might not be even entities whose core business is to provide data. It might be, just an institution that has data feeds that they want to be delivered on-chain. And so we had to expand the scope of how we are basically able to, again, open the amount of sourcing that can be supported in Lumina, not just focused on-chain pricing, but off-chain price feeds as well. And then also, really tackle again this obstacle of data provenance, of still being able to provide a proof of the origin of off-chain data. And so one of the opportunities here is again, looking into ZK proofs. Right, you can have ZK coprocessors and proofs that attestate for basically how things are operating and happening on-chain and proving the state, or rather the process of data as it's going through the on-chain architecture. But we're looking at also proofs to provide attestation for off-chain source as well. And when we really get to this point, I think we really build out arguably the most robust architecture for real-world assets in terms of like the Oracle side of things. And I think the space is still pretty early as it relates to infrastructure. A lot of the infrastructure providers are questioning themselves, how are they going to be able to robustly support the scale of demand that will prospectively be brought on chain from real-world assets.
So can you give me an example of what some of these real-world assets are that you're tracking, that you want to track data for?
Yeah, so it started out being pretty, mostly the basic ones. And I think there's even like a question as to like what even determines what a real world asset is. So when I personally say real world assets, like my scope of real world assets is pretty broad. I'm considering even equity price feeds on chain, commodities, Forex, and these kind of like really standard basic real world assets were initially where the demand lied, and we still see a ton of demand on that side. But as this real world asset landscape is evolving, the demand for more niche, innovative type of assets to be brought on chain is also expanding. We're having conversations with teams that are looking to bring like luxury goods, like watches, right? Or like cars, like one-off tokenized assets on chain, or unique financial metrics like bond ratings, like very niche one-off opportunities. And so, again, gets me back to this idea that sourcing Forex, commodities, and equities and bringing that on chain is rather straightforward. There's tons of data supporting that. You can get very robust, high confidence, third-party data providers off chain for that data. But the question that we are really looking to tackle with Lumina is how can we support all of these other types of assets in as robust of a fashion, right? The ones that might not have super liquid off-chain markets, like the stock market with equities or commodities. How can we provide high confidence data feeds for these one-off niche assets? And so I'd say the demand that we're seeing is still on a large scale, really, I'd say mostly, honestly, Forex, right? Because you see that like with stablecoins and cross-border payments, that's really taken over as one of the leading, I think, use cases for blockchain and crypto in the last couple of years. So as we look into real-world assets, that's been an easy, low-hanging fruit to tackle for a lot of dApps. But yeah, it's really exciting, and I think it's still early as it relates to like how comprehensive of a data offering we might be able to provide on-chain.
Interesting. So in the same way that you, for on-chain assets, focus on kind of the long tail tokens in indexes, you want to do the same with real-world assets.
Exactly. Expanding the scope of what's possible to be built on-chain through not just tackling the blue chips and the ones that everybody can provide, but yeah, really expanding that scope.
I'd love to understand more who your users are. Like who are the dApps that are actually using DIA price feeds and data?
Yeah, so the majority of, I think the best use case to date for DIA's data feeds has been probably lending protocols. And the reason this is the case is this is really the type of protocol where you see most dApps looking to have this wide scale of asset coverage, right? With perp dexes, it's a little bit limited because still perpetual dexes require blue chip assets most often that have tons of volume and liquidity in order to support such high frequency trading environments. But lending protocols, on the other hand, they don't necessarily need as high frequency updates. And because of that, we can support more long tail assets. We can expand, and again, this gets back to the idea of customizing Oracle data feeds that we really strive to specialize in. We can expand the window in between each update to take in more volume for assets that have less volume and provide more robust price feeds for assets that generally might have less volume and less liquidity. So our positioning to date has really done well with lending protocols. And again, these are the ones that are looking to integrate these ecosystem native price feeds. But not to deter from perpetual dexes has been a huge growing use case for Oracle price feeds in the last couple of years. A lot of centralized exchanges faced like tough regulation and went off-chain or exited the United States, and a lot of these users went on-chain. And so we've seen a huge growth in demand on that front. Stablecoins are leveraging DIA for providing the collateral that the stablecoin might be based off of, or if it's algorithmic, providing insight into the rebalancing of the stablecoin, or even furthermore, providing a price feed for the stablecoin so that the stablecoin can then be used in other DeFi types of applications. So candidly, it's quite broad. But I would say our best USP to date that's been proven to leverage, the unique assets that we coverage are lending protocols.
Can you give an example of like which lending protocols are using DIA?
Yeah, sure. So Silo Finance would probably be a pretty great example of one that's used DIA comprehensively. Silo's been multi-chain and relates back to our approach for being multi-chain, right? So Silo's been a great one, and we started with them on Arbitrum. They're using tons of Arbitrum native price feeds. They're doing isolated lending markets, so there's less risk for these long tail asset price feeds. In addition to that, we're working with tons of kind of new exciting markets as well, and ecosystems like Base, in ecosystems like Stacks, like Alephium. I would have to check into the DIA ecosystem. I think we have over like 50, maybe 60 different lending protocols using us. On Base, I'm only kind of like coming to mind right now are the ones I've been chatting with this week. Like Cheetah Finance is using us for like long tail asset price feeds for like the Base ecosystem native assets. Just overall, I would love to pull up the DIA ecosystem and take you through it. My core focus really of late has also been on the chains side, right? So one of the ways that we really approach growth is in partnerships with the chains. And we provide the DIA oracles as a public good on those chains so that any dApp can come and access it free of charge with very limited to no hurdles to building. So I can go off on a long list of like the last 20 chains we've partnered with in the last couple of months, right? Or so, but on the dApp side, we're really striving to make this permissionless so that we don't even need to necessarily know all of the dApps which are necessarily using us. But that said, the DIA ecosystem page will still hopefully tackle more comprehensively all of them.
What's the business model like? So you mentioned like for a lot of these chains, you're providing your price feeds as a public good, but you know, in kind of the long term or like for the use cases where it's not a public good, like how does it work?
Well, it's such an important question because you would want your Oracle provider or any infrastructure provider to have a business model to ensure that the product you're building can be sustainably based off this, right? So I think it's a great question when people ask this. You want to know that DIA is going to be here in 5, 10, 15, 20 years and have a sustainable business model to support our growth and expansion. And so what we're doing is we partner directly with blockchain foundations on which we deploy. So the kind of commercial aspect of our approach is in direct relationships with the blockchain foundation, whether it's a direct commercial agreement or via grant. And then in doing that, it supports the costs for the infrastructure and the maintenance to deliver these oracles on that chain at no cost to dApps. And so we've evaluated this approach. There's teams that are throughout the infra space, not just oracles, but on most of the infrastructure sides, like navigating how best to monetize or rather have revenue to support their model. And we find that charging dApps is a limit to building, right? Again, we want to make these as accessible as possible across as many chains as we can. And so we find that working directly with these foundations has been super beneficial for providing these oracles as a public good.
Super interesting. Okay, and then talking about what's next for DIA. So obviously the Lumina Layer 2 launch. But yeah, can you talk more about these milestones coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lumina mainnet launch is kind of all things focused on that right now. In the coming months, that's really where we want to put all of our emphasis in, on the building side, on the BD side, and on the marketing side, right? Really ship a product once live that is ready to be built on as robust of a fashion as the current DIA architecture. And as it relates to Lumina, I can perhaps speak on the business development side of things, really looking to, again, integrate Lumina on as many chains as possible. This is more of the near-term kind of focus, right? Get as many chains and dApps building on Lumina as possible and really expand, once again, our asset coverage of tokens, crypto tokens that are supported via Lumina, but also real-world assets that are supported via Lumina. We're having tons of exciting conversations with teams that are off-chain institutions or, just businesses that want to, in some way or another, tokenize and bring their assets on chain and have oracles supporting that so that users can leverage those assets on chain. So that's really a huge focus of ours right now. Again, getting this to scale where we're once again supporting as many data sources as possible. And this is the short-term focus. As we look more long-term, what's really exciting about Lumina is that Lumina kind of utilizes a modular architecture. So again, as I started off, we built Lumina to adapt to the ever-changing needs of oracles throughout the blockchain landscape. And so with Lumina's modular architecture, it gives us more flexibility to adapt. We're working, as I mentioned, we're in conversations with some of the most cutting edge teams that are building out ZK technology. And just the last year alone, ZK has scaled in terms of, reducing cost and latency. And so we're looking into, implementing ZK on Lumina, as I mentioned, and really opening up the span of what's possible to be built via Lumina by ultimately making it entirely a permissionless architecture. Right? So you don't need any permission to come in and deploy Lumina on your chain even. You can come in and basically enter the chain configuration settings, whether it's like chain ID, RPC endpoints, and a couple other things that would be needed to permissionlessly access Lumina in DIA oracles on any rollup or on any chain. And then once that's available on that chain, to be able to instantly customize and deploy your own oracles without needing to contact the DIA team. So we're really, again, the positioning that we're striving to fulfill here is being the most transparent, open source, trustless oracle on which anybody can come and build and have flexibility to build what they want.
Awesome, great stuff. So yeah, excited to see the Lumina launch and how all these kind of new use cases and assets come to the network.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.